thanks so much, and welcome everybody to this session, which is going to be, as he said, scalpel-sharp, I hope. And yes, I mean, it's a Sunday afternoon. The weather's a bit sort of not quite there, not quite summer. There's a little mystery hanging in the air. There might be a body in the library.
The day is young.
We don't know.
And the murder weapon's a candlestick.
Absolutely. So, but what is most exciting for me is having three women writers here today. I mean, two fabulous women and me being here with them. Because women writers, women crime writers, I mean, they're the queens, right? Let's go with Agatha Christie, let's go with Patricia Highsmith, the list goes on. P.D. James, can't stop. So today, here we have Liz Nugent, who is fabulous, best-selling author, and B, their books are going to take you, through deep areas, dark areas, mind-bending. I could not put it down. I read them straight through, just right through the night, and you will too when you line up there and get their books. But both of them have written, as I said, these mind-bending novels and go into areas which are pretty dark. But there isn't actually a body. So, that's what we were saying. There's murder there. But
no spoilers.
There isn't a body.
But
there isn't a body.
Yeah.
But there is so much else going on. And there isn't also a detective. The usual genre. There's a detective, there's a sidekick. These ladies aren't doing that, but they are taking you on this roller coaster ride. And today we are going to talk about Liz's, I'm going to bring them all up, Strange Sally Diamond, which is absolutely brilliant, the #1 bestseller, and B's One-Woman Crime Wave. So there we go. And as for me, I've written this book. It's called The Mystery of the Parsi Lawyer. So I don't do fiction, I do non-fiction. And my book, I'll just tell you a little bit about it. It's about Arthur Conan Doyle and the only case he investigates personally. So there is a Parsi lawyer who is imprisoned for a crime, and he writes to Arthur Conan Doyle and says, "Help me, clear my name." And Arthur Conan Doyle takes on the case. So it's non-fiction, it's true crime, but we'll get there first. We'll get there soon. I'm going to start with B, actually. Fabulous in pink. And the One-Woman Crime Wave. And B, as you said, you've previously written non-fiction.
Yes.
This is your first foray into fiction.
It is, yeah, and that was quite daunting actually. But then, everything's daunting and you just have to do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even just being at JLF and in the British Library, you're surrounded by such huge ideas, and all of the events that I've sat in on have tackled things like civilizational shifts and genocide and restitution, and it makes you feel very tiny as a human being, which is a good feeling. I like that. But my work, my One-Woman Crime Wave, looks at these topics from a position of tininess. So it's in the voice of a 15-year-old girl called Ashley, and she can't stop stealing. And the book is a turbulent chapter of her life, very turbulent. She's from a sort of really quite a damaged background, and she's gradually understanding class structures and obstacles to her well-being. So there isn't a dead body, but there is the crushing of hope, and there is the there is the thing that most middle-class British people would rather have bowel surgery without anaesthetic than talk about class. And class is where I wanted to go with this, the sort of most uncomfortable of conversations, and look at middle-class behaviours and the impacts that they can have, which aren't criminal or crimes as such. But the impacts can be devastating, and that's where she is.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you were inspired by J.B. Priestley.
Oh, I love J.B. Priestley. So not
tell
just
them.
because I'm from Yorkshire, but J.B. Priestley is the most famous son of Bradford, and he wrote a text that probably most of you know, An Inspector Calls, right? It's one of those plays that everyone does at school. I did at school, my kids did at school, your hairdresser knows it. It's very sort of democratic, and it's little known actually that J.B. Priestley was one of the giants of not just of literature, but of broadcasting in between the war. So he wrote, in the 1930s, he travelled the country and looked at things like the North-South divide, about increasing inequality, about social ills. He envisaged, you know, having been traumatised in the First World War, he was gassed in the trenches. He envisaged a new future and saw nationhood as a community. And he did radio broadcasts that reached audiences of 16 million. He was only second after Winston Churchill. So he was a huge figure in this campaign for ideas like the welfare state. So he was a formative influence on the creation of that post-war order. And of course, post-war, we had 40 years of burgeoning equality. It was like a boom in social equality, which now is very much slipping back very, very dramatically from the 1980s, but accelerated by things like COVID. You know, there's many reasons, but that was, for me, a really, really big theme, like capturing a moment and thinking, how did it slide apart from this chance at being more equal? How have we slid further apart as a society?
Just until the next election.
Well, yeah, holding my breath.
We live in hope.
Yeah, we do.
And I'm going to come to you, Liz, now. I mean, what a fabulous novel. Could not put it down. And it's also, of course, very dark. You go into these spaces. But at the same time, there is so much humanity, compassion, love in between all this. And how do you get to these dark spaces? And how do you get out of them as well?
To be honest, I always go with the first line. I always wanted a character to put because I joke with my husband all the time about what will we do when we die, and I always say, oh, put me out with the bins, you know, I won't mind, and you know, I'll be dead, it won't matter. So I started with that line, put me out with the bins.
In fact, should we read the line too?
Okay.
That's great.
Sorry,
so if you want to tell them a little bit, or just start with let's start with that brilliant opening, and then
I'll read it because it kind of sets it up. Put me out with the bins, he said regularly. When I die, put me out with the bins. I'll be dead, so I won't know any different. You'll be crying your eyes out. And he would laugh, and I'd laugh too, because we both knew that I wouldn't be crying my eyes out. I never cry. When the time came, on Wednesday, the 29th of November, I followed his instructions. He was small and frail, and 82 years old by then, so it was easy to get him into one large garden waste bag. With that setup, I always start my books with it like a startling opening scenario, because that automatically sets up that we're not dealing with normal here.
Yes.
This is somebody who is a little different and who has taken a joke very literally, and in fact her father has left written instructions of exactly where he wants to be buried and what church it is and what hymns should be sung. But Sally takes him literally, and the reason why Sally is neurodivergent in a way that defies any categorization. She's not autistic, she hasn't got Asperger's. Her father, who's just had her adoptive father, is a psychiatrist, and he has studied her his whole life, and he has not been able to pin a label on her because her behavior is so inconsistent. And the reason her behavior is so inconsistent was because I wanted her to do very different things at very different times, and it gave me a lot more freedom. And also because I have several autistic friends and none of them are the same. And I have several friends who have Asperger's and none of them are the same. So I didn't want to paint myself into a corner. So I had the freedom to do with Sally anything I wanted.
Yeah, and both of you have chosen women, you know, as your principal characters, your main voice. Bea, I want you to read a little bit about your young teenager.
Okay, so this is Ashley, and she's started babysitting in a house where she used to live in the top flat, but in that London way it's been gentrified and knocked through and made into a posh house, and she's just got a babysitting gig there, and it's her first night. And the parents are kind of flapping around going, oh, this, oh, that, you know, sort of just trying to leave the house but still panicking a little bit. The other thing parents did was send a text once they were on their way, basically so they didn't feel guilty about leaving their kids with a complete stranger. it helped them feel like they were still in control. It usually went something like, if he wakes up, spare milk in the fridge, smiley face, back around 11. And Ashley would always send a prompt and reassuring reply. And then came that surge of the most powerful joy, because they were not in control.
Oh, that's brilliant. And was it conscious choosing a girl for you, a teenage girl,
No.
and for you, a woman, to tell the story? Because there are two in this. I won't give away anything, but...
Well, my previous book, Our Little Cruelties, featured three brothers. And I think I had, there were three very different brothers, but it was very specifically about three men. And there is two narrators in this book, and the second one is a man. So, I kind of like writing men because, forgive me because this sounds very glib, but men have fewer thoughts.
Sorry, men.
No, it's not an insult. It's just that you say what you mean.
They're simple.
You say what you mean, whereas we don't. Like I have this. I've learned now, but when I first met my husband, and I was annoyed with him, he'd say, "Are you okay?" And I'd say, "I'm fine," and he thought I was fine. But I had this whole inner thing going on, like, why did you leave the toilet seat up again? And he'd be, it took me a long time to realize that men actually say what they mean, whereas women second guess themselves all the time, and we work around a situation to get to the point, like me answering this question.
No, but actually, one of the things I found very powerful with Sally Diamond is the way that she's attempting to make other people feel, but she knows that there's a conversational, there are rules of engagement, and she's trying her best to sort of, and she doesn't always, but that's actually quite a sort of painful thing to observe and to watch her experience. She knows when she's done it right, and she knows when it hasn't worked.
She doesn't pick up on social cues at all.
She makes these mental notes though, that next time, remember, which is really sweet.
Yeah.
So it's, as I said, it's so endearing at the same time, as she is.
I think because she is the way she is, and she doesn't, nothing influences her. She is who she is, and when she finds out about this horrific past that she's had, everybody around her is far more upset than she is. Like she's troubled by the story that's revealed, but she actually can get on with life, and get on with things. And it's the people around her who are far more upset. And, she goes through 4 years of psychotherapy then over the course of the book to deal with that and then to come out of her shell and to make friends. Like one of the things in the beginning of the book when we first meet her, she pretends to be deaf in order to avoid conversation, which I think is a brilliant idea, and I wish I'd thought of it. But actually, I'm not antisocial, I'm very social. But,
what's that you say?
So...
Right. And how did both of you, the research for the book, you set yours, interestingly, in 2012.
I did,
Olympics,
but before I wanted also to draw in your work as well, which does tackle extremely uncomfortable themes of racism and trauma that's inflicted upon this family. So, there's definitely, are you going to read too?
I'm reading. And on the subject of writing about men, I've actually written more about men, funnily enough. That's how it happens. I guess one follows the story. So this is two men. There's Arthur Conan Doyle, and there's quite a few men. There's the Parsi lawyer and his father. So as I said, he was a young lawyer based in Birmingham in a sort of mining village. And one day in this village there is a horrendous crime. Cattle are slashed and they are just left to die. This is 1903. And it becomes this village of horror. It's called Great Whirly, the village, and they call it, he's the Whirly Ripper. Who's coming in at night? Who's slashing the cattle? The police are lost. They cannot find, it must be somebody local, but they can't find a killer. And, well, when you don't know who to blame, there's all the prejudice that comes in. So who do you blame? There is this Indian family mixed race Indian family in the village. We have the lawyer. He's the 23-year-old George Adalji. That's his name. He's the main guy in the book. But his father is really interesting. His father is the vicar of this church. So it's the first South Asian vicar in a tiny white mining village in the Midlands. I mean, you tell me, is this going to work?
That's a horror story right there. Just the sort of, tense, racist, judgmental village life.
Yeah, so 1876 is when he becomes the vicar. We're at the height of, Victorian England. First vicar, and George is born at the same time. And within years, the anonymous letters start coming through the door, the graffiti on the walls, the Adaljis are wicked, etc. This is all, these letters are there in the libraries, and you can actually hold them and see these poison pen letters. So, this happens, and this goes on while George is still a teenager, till he's in university. He becomes a lawyer, but this constant, this racism goes on, and nothing happens. No one is arrested, no one is charged. And the police think that George, this young little boy, has been writing these letters to himself. So he's, for whatever reason. And so he's already under the radar when these crimes happen. 1903, the slashing of animals, police incompetent, they don't know who to blame. So who do you blame? This peculiar family, peculiar in quotes, that lives in this vicarage. And there's the father, he's a Parsi, he speaks with an Indian accent. There's the mother's English, and of course the son, George, he's quite awkward. And of course he's arrested, he's charged, he's arrested. So I'll just read a little bit about his first day in jail. And this is from some of his own writings. So it's in Birmingham, near Birmingham, in a little place called Cannock. Cannock police station had 2 small cells for the detention of prisoners. George was locked in one. He described it later as the worst cell he had ever seen or heard of. Remember, he was a lawyer. He had seen a few jails. As they closed the door on him, it was almost pitch dark. It had no gas or other artificial light. He was told he could not have a lamp or candle lest he set fire to himself. There was no bell, and the only way to attract attention was to thump or kick the door. This he did loudly at one stage in the night, and was told that he had disturbed a policeman who was saying his prayers before he left on duty. The only furniture in the cell was a fixed bench, which worked as a chair, table, and bed. A constable needled him. "Well, Mr. Adalji," he said, "I'm sorry to see you here, but how did you manage to slip by all our chaps? What time did you put the horse through it? Give the show away or someone else will." Through the evening, the police tried to make him talk so he could incriminate himself, but George would not oblige. His training as a lawyer had taught him that prisoners often had their words twisted out of context, ended up in trouble for what they said casually at the police station. All night long, the police kept a strict watch to see that he would not attempt suicide. The cell was pitch dark, he could see nothing. Every hour, from 8 p.m. till 2 a.m., an officer would come with a lantern to check on him and try to make him talk. On the 6th appearance, George told him not to come again, and he went away. There was no water in the cell. When George asked for some, he was told he could not have any because prisoners tried to drown themselves by holding their heads underwater in the bucket. Finally, well past 2 a.m., tired, thirsty, and worried, George fell into a troubled sleep. It had been exactly 10 years since the last anonymous letter declared that George Adalji would be sent to his grave. So there we are.
That's very powerful. And I'm fascinated by that because earlier on you said, when you were sort of collecting together our themes, you were saying, there isn't a body and there isn't even a detective. But, in that one, you're the detective who's trailing Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So it's almost like extra layers of detective work.
It is, because the funny thing that happened is, of course, then he writes, he's imprisoned, 7 years imprisonment. And then he writes to Arthur Conan Doyle and he says, help me, you're the only one who can clear my name. And Arthur Conan Doyle takes on this challenge. So that's how he goes to he does everything, full Sherlock Holmes mode. He goes, it's quite funny. He goes to this scene of the crime. I'll tell you the first scene, actually. It's quite funny. So he asks to, he wants to meet George, so he calls him to this hotel in Charing Cross. It's the Charing Cross Hotel, all of you know it, just near the station. Arthur Conan Doyle would often stay there, so he invites him there. George is there, but he reaches late himself. So when he goes there, he stands at the door and he looks around, and George is sitting there reading a newspaper. And of course he identifies him immediately because he's the only Indian in the room. And then he stands and he watches him. And just like, all of you who know the Sherlock Holmes books, power of deduction, something deduced within the first few minutes, even before anything has been said, Arthur Conan Doyle stands there and he says he couldn't have done it because he sees George is holding the newspaper really close to his face. He's myopic.
I can't see. Yeah.
And he said, this man could not have gone out in the dark night and slashed cattle, so he knows he's innocent. So he's a full Sherlock Holmes mode. And then, of course, he meets him, and then he goes to the scene of a crime, and he does everything. But what was fascinating was I had to go into the police files. I know what he's doing, but I had to also follow what is happening with the police files, and I know what they are doing. And they are so cross and so annoyed because the papers were saying Sherlock Holmes is investigating this crime. It was Arthur Conan Doyle, and the policeman there does not want a writer of crime fiction to be challenging him.
Of course.
So he does everything to, trip him on the trail.
Can I ask you, is any of it fictionalized? Did you fictionalize it, or everything is of record?
Yeah.
Okay.
101 footnotes there. Yeah, because they wrote their diaries. George himself wrote some things, and the police files give you a vivid account of what was happening behind the scene.
Yeah,
And this man is just... I knew things that Arthur Conan Doyle didn't know, that the police were actually setting him up. They actually laid false trails to trip him up. And all these things they wouldn't have known when they were doing it. Police also wrote some anonymous letters, which they proudly say in the police files, that I wrote these to trap George. So there is so much. We talk about, miscarriages of justice and police things, it's still going on. We saw what happened in Northern Ireland, and various other police cases. They just go on and on and on. And it's still so relevant. It still happens. They set up something. They cover the trails, which is what they did here.
So the theme of racism in your work, mine is around the themes of class, and yours is around violence against women and girls, and where that comes from, and understanding its roots. I think just shows the power of not necessarily crime fiction, but of fiction to step inside those themes and to generate understanding.
Yeah, I do think crime fiction and even true crime fiction allows us to address issues that you wouldn't necessarily get in any other type of fiction.
Yeah.
Like one of my books covered there was a massive scandal. I don't know whether you're aware of the Magdalen laundries, where women, young pregnant women, were taken away from their families and locked up, incarcerated. And this has happened up until, the 1980s. I think the last laundry closed in the early 90s, but right up until, when I was an adult. And the women were kept as slave labor in these so-called laundries. They weren't allowed to leave, so there were prisons, in fact. And then when they gave birth, their babies were put up for adoption, and they didn't get a choice. And mostly, the women's families would have sent them to these places for the sin of becoming pregnant outside marriage. And the fathers of these babies were never identified, never faced any consequences. Ireland was very, very good at punishing women.
Gosh, grim. Yeah. So, we have race in both your books. You have B, you want to start with you have one Indian character, one person from Syria, and it's also class playing, which is,
Well, yeah, first and foremost it is, because, the action rolls out quite locally. In fact, some of it's even in the British Library. And then I got a job here, which was a bit weird. So I was like, oh no, should I take that bit out? But anyway, it's set locally. And Camden, I mean, look around. It's very fabulous. Google lives here. It's immensely wealthy, but its poverty rates are above the London average, 40% of childhood poverty. And that's, you know, children with really limited chances living in overcrowded situations. And that's Ashley's situation. And that isn't a crime in itself, but to me that is sort of criminal, and you know that's something that I wanted to look at. Ashley, and on the Sherlock Holmes front, Ashley does part of her revenge, even though she doesn't fully understand it yet, is that she does do a sort of Sherlock Holmes when she's in people's houses.
Yeah,
you know, the question is, what does your babysitter do when you're not there? And in her case, she's kind of finding all your secrets and stealing them and going through, you know, just everyone just thinks, you know, what is in my underwear drawer, what are in my drawers, what's in my bathroom, what could you piece together by doing a thorough search? That's
she's
what
forensic
she's doing. Yes.
in the extent that she goes.
Yes.
It's amazing. For how old was she? What,
She's
14?
15.
15,
She's
yeah.
15.
And she is doing this forensic search and profiling every person that she is babysitting, which is scary.
Yeah, there's an attempt to sort of give
also
herself power that she doesn't really. You know, but then ultimately the power that she does find comes from a different place altogether.
Yeah. And you have both race and class playing, you know, together. You have.
Yes, because there's also you know, immigrant culture, which we know that that's why London's a great city. We know that that's what Britain's built on. That's just you know, I mean, for my money, it's not even open for debate. But you wouldn't think that, seeing the current state of politics. So yes, one of the heroes of the book is Samina, who's of Iraqi descent, and she's a refugee, and she is the person ultimately who is able to fix things. Yeah. She's amazing.
And yours has, we have so many characters who are then marginalized. You know.
I kind of like to match the character to the place that they're living in. So Sally lives in a really small rural Irish village. But the village is growing. Like, there's a meat plant opening up, there's a chemical plant coming. They're about to have a Lidl, like the first actual supermarket in this tiny village. And I use that, and with other books as well, I've used that to show that the place is growing at the same time as the character is growing. Like, Sally is coming out of her shell and she's meeting new people, and her first friends are the new immigrants who have just arrived to take jobs in these. So there's Indian characters, there's Nigerian characters. There are people from all over the world are coming into this tiny Irish village. So it allows Sally to open up. But one of the beauties of Sally's neurodivergence is that she sees no difference between anyone. She treats children the same as she treats adults. She tells children at the beginning of the book, don't go to school, it's a terrible place. but that's her own experience, and she doesn't realise that this isn't everybody's experience.
And then she wants to look after those children, and the mother is saying, maybe that's not the best thing to tell the kids.
She offers herself as a babysitter to the children's mother, and the children's mother is kind of wary of her, and she says, well, what would you do if they got upset? And she said, well, I'd probably pull my hair out. And so the mother of the children realizes that maybe this wouldn't be a good idea. But as Sally grows, and I think by the end of the book, you know, after all that is over, I think Sally would be their piano teacher, you know. There is a place for Sally in the community afterwards.
So can I ask a question? Because I've written non-fiction in the past and quite new to fiction, and that freedom of being able to find, you know, deliver what happens to your protagonists, I found immense and quite paralysing. And you know, talking about endings without giving away any endings, I found that I did have some endings that ended badly for Ashley, and I couldn't quite cope. And your ending is noteworthy. I don't want to say any more about it, but it's not comfortable. We're not okay. But, you know,
it's
can
not
I say that?
Yeah.
We're not okay at the end.
Well, in the American version, it is okay.
Oh, is it? You're joking. Really?
The Americans wanted me to rewrite the ending.
I was very impressed by that, though.
Yeah.
I thought that takes courage to go, maybe it's not okay.
Well, I thought it was realistic.
You know, it was chilling.
I thought it was realistic.
Yeah.
But the Americans wanted a happier ending. Like, there's no happy endings in any of my books. But I think they're more
ultimately,
real.
We have some sort of continuity which happens. I won't reveal it, but
Yeah.
you know.
Well, the next generation,
I think
we know that the next generation of this very trauma, it's really about generational trauma and how it affects
How it translates,
siblings
yeah.
in this case. But the next generation turns her back on the information that is given to her about her background and decides, no, I'm not gonna, this is not going to be my story. I reject all that. So she doesn't take part in this podcast that somebody wants to make of her background, and she says, no, I'm going to be a concert pianist, but she doesn't know where she got her gift for playing the piano from.
It is.
So,
I mean, it's a beautiful scene, but yeah, we don't want to give it away. But tell me, Liz, and then B, how it is. There's a lot of psychology in this book. So how did you do your research? Where was it?
I didn't.
Yeah.
I'm not a psychiatrist and I'm not a psychologist and I've no background in either. But I am somebody who grew up with a disability in a school, a very expensive school that my mother couldn't afford. So she sacrificed things like heating and food to send me to this ridiculously expensive school. So I was always on the outside. Like, as somebody who was disabled, I was on the outside. You know, I couldn't participate in sports. I couldn't play a musical instrument. So I was always on the periphery, and I think it made me a great observer of human nature. So I didn't actually do any research for this book. I did have to run it past a psychiatrist in the end, and a neurodivergent reader, sensitivity reader for all of that. But they were all okay with the things that I had written. You know, they thought it was realistic enough. So yeah, I just make it up.
Perfect. And B, what did you know? What was your sort of?
I did a lot of research by listening to teenage
girls.
girls.
I know your girls
A
helped.
lot. I mean, I've also been one, but a long time ago. But yeah, there was a lot of sort of tuning into that teenage girl, that combination of kind of incandescent rage and also vulnerability, which I found quite it has its own extraordinary energy that I found very compelling. So yes, there were some areas where I took advice. So one of my characters is on the autism spectrum, and I did want to have someone else read that because I absolutely believe that you should get as many ideas on, as many pairs of eyes on these things as possible. So I took advice, but also I just wanted to go to. I just enjoy things that are quite uncomfortable, and I think that's probably a journalism background thing, but I have been reliably informed by a neighbour that I'll never be invited to a dinner party again. Of course. So that's part of the research, I guess.
Oh dear, right. In fact, I was going to ask you, I mean, because both of these, we do read news items, where somebody's been locked up, that sort of thing does happen, and they've come out after years. So how much was it based on true, something you read, something that stayed with you? Both of you. Yeah.
I read Room, by
Emma
Donoghue, fantastic Emma Donoghue, who's also Irish and actually turns out grew up around the corner from me. She's now living in Canada and has taken Canadian citizenship. But I read Room and I was very taken by the fact that the story, even though it's told through the eyes of the child, it's really about what's happening to his mother. And through his eyes, we see the damage that's done to his mother. But I was wondering, what happens to him when he grows up? Like, what's he told or not told? And then when it came to the psychiatrist character who adopts Sally after, she has been through this horrific experience as a child, and I kind of thought, okay, if I was a psychiatrist and I had the power to take away those memories by literally, and I don't even know if this is ethical or legal or whatever, but he's the chief psychiatrist in the whole country of Ireland, and he's a man, so his word goes in 1980. So he sedates her to such an extent that she forgets. She's not put to sleep, she's not like Sleeping Beauty kind of thing. But he sedates her to such an extent that her first memory is age 7 at her 7th birthday party, and people are singing happy birthday, and she hates the noise. And you see immediately that, she is damaged by what has happened, but she doesn't remember it. So in some ways, because she doesn't remember it, it's easy for her to get past it and easy for her to deal with it. But it's only when she goes into psychotherapy that she realizes that the reasons for her difference are so rooted in the damage that was done as a child.
Right. So just to explain, can I say
Sure.
what's happened to, why is Sally damaged? Is because Sally's mother was locked up by, a man and kept. It's some of you may have room the book.
It's a Fritzl type situation. Yeah.
So she was locked up, and Sally is actually born in this room in confinement, and then they are rescued, and then she's adopted. So that's her background, growing up like this. But her memory, as as you write, the psychiatrist she doesn't remember. She's born in this confined space. It's like just a dump. And her mother's been there for how many years? Remind me?
I think 17 years.
17 years. And she was a child as well when she was taking. So it's layers and layers of...
Sally is the child of
Sally's
a
the child
paedophile
of her,
because her
mother
was 14 when she was taken. So she's the child of a paedophile and his victim. And I always wonder what happens. You sometimes hear the stories of the adult kidnappee. I know there's a better word, writer, I can't think of it. But I wanted to know what happens to the children
when
of
the
those
children
people,
come out. Absolutely.
And I thought, if I was a psychiatrist and if I had it in my power to remove those memories, would I? And I decided, yes, I would.
Yeah, interesting.
It's worth noting, though, that one of my I had a resistance to crime fiction, the idea of crime, because of its sort of preoccupation with awful things happening to women and girls, but that it's particularly on TV and done in a sort of prurient way, which absolutely yours does the absolute opposite. It leads us into a sort of in-depth understanding.
I don't get graphic. There's
no, it's really not, and it sort of generates empathy in a really curious, fascinating way. But that is a thing within crime, though, that it has been a way of exploiting women's bodies. And it's interesting that you noted there aren't dead bodies in it, but sitting within the wider genre, I hadn't even thought that we're sort of three women writing about crime with women in it. But that is of note then in the wider genre.
I think women are more attuned to threat. We're the people who are ringing our friends to say, did you get home okay? And we're the women who are walking around with our keys as claws in our hands when we're walking alone at night. And, we are just more aware of, every time we go on a date,
of course,
we're taking a risk, so it's I think women definitely are
our antennas are up.
Yeah, our antennas are up, and so
up,
so you will find that most female crime writers are dealing with that type of misogyny in some way.
Yeah, I mean, even Christie sort of dived into such dark themes in various places. So,
I've never read Agatha Christie. Don't throw me out. I am but I've never read Agatha Christie.
Some of them, and you just think that, okay, she really entered some dark spaces there. I mean, not as dark, Patricia Highsmith as well, but she does some of them, and you think, wow, that is something.
So there doesn't have to be a body. Have we established that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right.
I've had 5 preventable deaths.
Right.
Yeah.
No murders.
Well, I have dead horses, and one of the things I had to say is that yes, animals were harmed in this book.
People hate that, you know that. Like I've been told you can kill as many people as you want, but just don't kick a puppy.
Yeah. I mean, it's horrific.
The last
crime.
taboo of crime fiction. I dare you in your next book.
And in fact, on the subject, I mean, when I was writing this, and I stuck to the main story because as a writer, you do go into some rabbit holes, and then you can't come out, and you just wonder so much. And but I had to keep myself on track. But one of the things I thought at the end of it was, we're talking about psychiatry, like I would have loved to talk to a psychiatrist, but it doesn't fit into the narrative structure. But just for myself, what sort of a person goes slashing animals and not killing them? Just, in the equus type of crime. I mean, why do you do this?
It was the basis of the play Equus, wasn't it, by Peter Shaffer?
Yeah, Peter Shaffer. So that sort of crime, but this is Victorian times.
I know.
And it went on over months and months. So 6 months till George is arrested. And it also led to this little town becoming this center. It's in the media, so people are coming. This voyeurism, again, crime and voyeurism. I mean, when you write about it, how do you keep the voyeurism out? But when a crime happens, they were all coming there.
I can't wait to read it, but
To
you
photograph.
Find out in the end who did it. Oh no, you can't tell me.
Spoiler.
Sorry.
You'll just have to buy the book.
I'll tell you in the green room.
Okay.
I was told that it sold out
But
before the show.
so the eye-catching part is the horrible thing that happens, but the bit that we should look at is the impact that it has. So
The consequences.
yes, is where it lands and how it lands on people. So, for example, with Ashley, she's only 15. She's having a very stressful time, and it gets worse throughout the book. She becomes more and more stressed and slightly unhinged because of the pressures that are on her, and so that to me is of just as much interest from the observational point of view, and from also creating empathy point of view. The great Barbara Kingsolver quote that fiction creates empathy. So it's not just the horrible thing that happened. It's where that lands and how that lands on people.
I mean, as she's doing these, as a reader, you're just saying, Ashley, stop, please stop. Don't dig this further. You're just digging your own,
Yeah.
But that's the power of your writing, B. So it just gets into this. But were you influenced by any? Was there something?
Sort of in my life.
No. For this theme of this.
I have to be careful what I say.
Like we were talking about true stories. So was this based on something?
Well, I think all stories are true
Based on
at some
something,
level.
somewhere.
We call it fiction, but
Elizabeth Strout was at a festival I was at yesterday in Dublin, but I missed her talk because we were scheduled together, and today we're scheduled against Maggie O'Farrell. So, but she said when she was asked about why men don't read as much fiction as women, because men tend towards non-fiction. It's great to see so many men in this audience, but. She said men don't read fiction because they think it's not true. I thought that was very interesting because all fiction is based on something.
Of course, yeah.
So
wonderful. So what's next? I mean, that's the usual sort of question.
I'm working on book 6. I've only written 5 books. I've really been terribly lazy.
that's really not terribly lazy, please.
In 10 years, and my next one isn't out until 2026, and I'm only 30,000 words in. I can't tell you anything about it because, first of all, it might get me cancelled.
You'll have to kill us.
Yeah, I'd have to kill you.
Bodies.
There will be bodies in the library.
I'm also writing a play.
Oh, wow.
For,
yeah. So have any of your books been adapted into?
Oh, everything's been
all
optioned.
of them?
Nothing's been made.
Okay.
It's the usual story.
The usual story, right.
It's great though because it's free money. They pay you money not to stop everybody else making the film.
You feel like the rent collector, really.
Yeah. But they keep renewing it every couple of years, and you get some cash every couple of years, and then they never make it, and then they drop it. So
I've had work adapted, and I love the grumble. Everyone grumbles about the adaptation. It's like it's a thing that writers love to do. It's very indulgent.
That was the killer for me.
Sign the thing and then run in the opposite direction, take the money and flee, never look again.
I went to see Sarah Snook in Picture of Dorian Gray here in London a couple of weeks ago, and I was so blown away by her performance.
Really? Wow.
And I thought she was so perfect. And I sent her a copy of Strange Sally Diamond to the theatre for her. And literally 3 weeks later, my very good friend Andrea Mara, who is an Irish writer, announces that her book is being made into a film starring Sarah Snook.
Oh.
I was never so happy for a friend and so gutted and jealous.
She'll do more films.
No, there will be.
Maybe.
And there are lots of others. I mean, it's just waiting to be adapted.
I hope so.
It is fantastic. So I've been told 10 minutes, and I will be very generous and take questions. So, yes. Do we need a mic?
Yes.
As part of your professional practice, do you have strategies for going out and proactively finding stories, or do you wait for them to come to you?
They come to me. I come up with the first line, and then I think about what kind of person would say that. And that's all I have at the beginning. Like when I started writing, well, I had the line in my head for a year before I wrote it down. And it was the first line of my first book. And it was, I expected more of a reaction the first time I hit her. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know who was saying that. And for a year, I had that line knocking around in my head. And then when I eventually wrote it down, more words just followed.
Wow.
And this character came to life in Unravelling Oliver. But, you know, that's where I start. And they're very character-driven, I suppose. So characters comes first.
Mm-hmm. You, B?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think I do the opposite. An idea has to pursue me for quite a long time, and you know when you just can't shake it off, and you can't stop thinking about it, that it's lodged and it's stuck there, and then you finally go, oh, right, okay, and sort of face up to it. So that's certainly how the idea of this, of a sort of, you know, class war babysitter on a revenge mission, you know, was, once it had lodged, it took a very long time. It stuck there for a really long time until I couldn't not do it. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of the opposite of going out and looking for a story.
What about you, Shrabani?
Yeah, well,
Heels come knocking.
Yeah, no, I'm always, I'm a journalist, so I'm always looking for different stories, unusual ones, and things in newspapers catch my eye. We had tiny mentions. So this book, Parsi Lawyer, was because there was a tiny article in the Times that there was going to be an auction of letters. And these letters, they said, and I knew about George Adalji, but I was doing other things. I never managed to. He was always there at the back of my head that one day I'd love to do something. And I mean, Arthur Conan Doyle and, you know, an Indian, it was a story waiting to be told. It was a no-brainer, but I needed more. So because it's non-fiction, I need more stuff. So this little article in the Times that said there's an auction of letters, and these letters were to do with this chief of police. They were exchange of letters between Arthur Conan Doyle and the chief of police. And they were to do with the George Adalji case. And I said, I'm sure there's something there. So promptly went to Bonham's. I said, I'm a journalist. I need to write a story about this. So they said, yeah, come in. They brought in so many boxes. And they normally give you half an hour because, you know, I'm not somebody who's going to buy that at auction. So I'm a journalist. So they give you half an hour to have a look. And I was there for like 3 hours. And I could see them getting like really restless. What is this woman up to? Why is she taking such copious notes? So they came to me, it's interesting, isn't it? I said, yeah, very interesting. And then after another hour, they said, you know, we are not a library. This is an auction house. Very gentle, very polite, but I was actually led out of Bonham. So I said, there it goes. So many boxes full of this stuff, and it's going to go, somebody's going to buy it, it'll go into private collections. And I'm not the praying sort, and I prayed. I said, please don't let it go into somebody's private collection.
Surely that would go into a university archive or somewhere.
It did. So after the auction,
you did have access.
Yeah. Portsmouth Library, they have the Arthur Conan Doyle collections. They had it. I was in there.
Fantastic.
So amazing. I sort of look for themes, but I have to follow them. So it takes me like 3 years, 4 years to find the stuff to, you know, make a whole story. Yeah. There was a question this side. Lydia, yes.
Thank you, all three of you. But I have a question for B. Mm-hmm. You've written journalistic articles, you've written non-fiction books, and then you produced a novel. You mentioned you find writing fiction challenging. In which way exactly and why?
Mm-hmm. It's harder. I find it harder. It's like trying to make a sculpture out of jelly. It just, the freedom is really hard. And maybe that's something that changes with practice. But if you've done a lot of, I mean, I worked for World Service Radio, so it's not only non-fiction, it's kind of no adjectives, it's very, very, very stripped down. So it was the freedom that I found quite paralysing, and that's why it just took me so long. And maybe that'll get easier, I don't know. I'm not sure I can do it again, though. It was really hard. It's just hard. I take my hat off to fiction.
I agree totally. I think as journalists, we are so steeped in, I don't know, writing non-fiction. I don't know if I could ever dare write fiction.
Well,
I wouldn't.
Bad news for you. It gets harder.
It does get harder. Why does it get harder?
Because after every book, you think you've used it up, every single idea in your brain. And Marion Keyes is a good friend of mine. She said to me, no, you have to wait for the well of ideas to refill between books. Like once you've finished a book. So like I take quite long breaks between books because my well is very slow to refill. But I do find they are getting more difficult to come up with a different angle or a new perspective or, you know. And I've written about men, I've written about kind of sociopathic women, I've written about three brothers, I've written about, you know, I try and mix it up, but they're all, I suppose, in the domestic noir. Julia Crouch, an English writer from Brighton, she coined that term, domestic noir. They're all based around the home and the family and what constitutes a family, I suppose. I took that to its darkest extent in this book.
But you know, there is love and hope in this. So, we always go away, even from the darkest stories.
And it's funny, like it's funny as well. Like Sally has a great sense of humour, and I really wanted people to laugh with her and not at her, because you know I think for anybody who's read it. Well, I hope you loved Sally at the end of it as much as I did when I finished there.
Right.
That's again one of the functions of fiction is that you can. With a non-fiction, it'll be, you know, terrible things happen to women and girls. This is violent misogyny. Isn't that awful? And with fiction, you can, you know, I mean, or with mine, you know, some people are really poor and don't have opportunities. Isn't that bad? I mean, the facts aren't really as compelling as a person that's moving through that world and taking the reader with them. So, yeah. I'm all for fiction now.
We have about 2 minutes. Last question, Michelle.
Just to say that it was a really fascinating discussion and one could listen to you guys all day, but this question's really for Liz. What struck me was you said you had 2 endings and you have an American ending, and I was wondering if there was a conflict as creatively, as a writer, to go with a different ending. And I get that you have to cater to readers, but did you feel that there was a conflict, and is there an ending that you might prefer?
I didn't mind it at all, actually, because, you know, a market is a market, and the Americans said our readers would be very upset by the ending, and I was kind of going, that's kind of the point. But I like to disturb the readers. Yeah. But it took me half an hour to write. It's a 2-page short chapter that just gives hope for a certain character who I think you might know.
I really want to read.
So it was very quick and easy to do, and they were happy with it, and I was happy with it. And when I was done, I offered, because it was before it came out in the UK, I have different publishers in the UK and America, so I offered Penguin UK the Simon & Schuster ending, and they said no, we'll keep the ending. They'll keep the ending. Okay. So I don't know, like. It's translated to something like 32 languages now, but I don't know which ones have which ending, you know, because some people took it from the Simon Schuster PDF and some people took it from the Penguin PDF, but
it's a tricky one because you don't want your readers to be completely comfortable because then they'll fall asleep. So that exact moment of uncomfortability is a really important one, and you know, getting that balance right is. It's a very, very delicious notion. True. I got someone in my family texted going, I'm reading your book and I feel really uncomfortable. And I was like, well, good. But I didn't know how uncomfortable. I wasn't quite sure. But yeah, you want the reader to not be entirely comfortable. Certainly for some of the book.
And as for changing endings, Dickens had to change his ending for Great Expectations. He was told by his friend Wilkie Collins, "No, you've got to let them get together."
Oh, I didn't know
And
that.
so he had 2 different endings, and we have the happy one. So it's all, and I have been told time is up. So give a big, big.
Thank you.